So if you're going to move to Mexico, you don't need to know Spanish. In most locations, you can get away with having just English, and people here are very accommodating of people who don't speak Spanish. However, the more Spanish you know, the more rich your experience will be living in Mexico. Just like if you're going to any other country, I think I compare it a little bit. I have a degree in landscape architecture, so I compare it to like looking at a tree. Once you know the language that describes trees, you can have a much more rich experience with what is that tree, what are the seeds on that tree, how does it work, how do the branches work? But you can only see that stuff once you have the language. So I've got John with me today, and this is something we met online because of the channel, and John had made a comment about learning Spanish, and he's definitely a language student, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his journey to Mexico, but we're going to focus in this video about the additional experiences you can have once you know the language. Or I guess I can't even say once you know the language, because that sounds like there's a stopping point in the future, but the more language you know, the more of a great experience you can have. So John, just let's get a little bit of your story. How did you end up in Mexico?
Well, my wife and I are early retirees. We retired in January of 2022, and we left everything behind except for a few suitcases and stored some items in our son's basement in Minneapolis. And we've been full-time nomads, and we got here in February of 2023, and we're here for 6 months before we move on to the next place.
Cool. And will all those places be in Mexico, or are they kind of spread around?
They're spread around the world. We're going from here to Nova Scotia for 2 months, and then we're going back to Germany for 3 months, and then to England and so forth.
Okay, so, yeah. Awesome. So you'll have a very rich travel schedule ahead of you.
Yes.
So you mentioned you're early retirees. How old were you guys when you retired?
Well, not really early, but 59 and a half.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I consider like 65. Like if you can retire before 65, that is great. That's kind of what I encourage people to do. Is start that adventure before you hit 65. So now let's look back at your language history, because you mentioned you're going to Germany, and I know you have got some experience with that language too. So just let's get some background on how you have been a student of learning languages.
Well, many years ago, I went and lived in Germany, and before I went there, I actually had German in high school, and then I went to a school where I learned how to speak it on the street, so to speak, and it was such an adventure. I absolutely loved it. I loved the opportunity to get to the point where I could converse in another language and doing something that I wasn't taught as a child. It was sheer effort, and it was one of the greatest things that I ever did. And some years ago, before I retired, we made the decision. Eventually, we want to settle in Spain. But then as the retirement came closer, we were saying, wait a minute, we want to see the whole world. But part of our retirement plan back when we were thinking of this was 2016 was, hey, I'm going to learn Spanish. And I want to repeat at this age what I did many years ago with German, because it was like one of the coolest things in my life. And so that's what I did. Basically, 2016 started with Spanish, had traditional classes, and did a variety of things, and here we are in 2023.
Yeah, so I had kind of a similar journey in terms of like learning Spanish, over the years, taking classes. I took French in high school, so maybe that was helpful to learning Spanish. In some ways, it was maybe more confusing, but it's something where when you live here, it makes it easy to learn if you're curious, because, we're here at a museum and a library, and there's so much to, you see a book and you're like, well, what is De Ballenas de Hombres? It's of whales and men. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, very good.
So I only know that because I looked that word up at one point, because there's, we're here in La Paz, and so there's a lot of whales, and so you see that word a lot. But it was kind of like, okay, well, what is that? So you're around it and you're curious. My wife really like gets really frustrated with me sometimes where we're having a conversation. I'm like, wait a minute, I need to look that up really quick. But it helps. You learn these little words, you learn different ways of seeing things, different ways that people are speaking, different tenses or things like that. So being amongst it definitely helps. Even if I don't have a lot of friends who speak Spanish, but I'm around Spanish an awful lot. And actually, we're going to get into some of the things, some of the doors that this has opened for you. I mean, you're here at the Regional Museum and you come here often. And this is a place that I'd never been to before. So we'll talk about that. But I do want to share a little thing. And actually, I'm going to have a video link up in one of the corners here. And this is something exciting to me is this past weekend, I got to go to a quinceañera. And a quinceañera is a 15th birthday party for a young Mexican woman. I was the only person there that spoke English, like any English. And this was a Mexican family. And it was like being at a wedding. And they sat me down with grandma, and we talked just a little bit, and she was able to kind of explain to me some of the things. Like, I'm like, well, who is that dancing with the quinceañera now? It's like, well, that's her brother, and that's this. But one of the things that came up was, at some point, she said it was her, padrino, which I had to look up. I'm like, Padrino. Looked it up, and it said it was a godparent. And I was like, wait a minute, that it's the same age. So the next day, I did more research and found out a Padrino at a quinceañera is different than a Padrino at a baptism. But essentially, it's a sponsor. So it's a similar type of concept. But and now I know the word Padrino, and I know what it means and what it also can mean. But it's a great experience. But having been there and being part of that, Kat didn't go with me. Kat doesn't speak as much Spanish. She would have been much more uncomfortable. It was a little bit uncomfortable not being able to really converse with people. And I think if I had a better conversational level of Spanish, I could have had a much richer experience. So I'm glad I got to check off being at a quinceañera, but I could have had a lot more if I was able to really talk with the other family members. I was able to just kind of get along with, what's going on.
But yeah, and it sounds like you picked up a lot. And, the Mexicans are so friendly, and they'll meet you where you are with your language. So like just the fact that you were there and you were interested and you had questions, there you go. I'm listening to your story and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I got to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that is like, I've been, hoping to see one, and, because it's a big thing in this culture. So maybe you've never been to a quinceañera, but maybe, tell folks some of the other things that you've gotten to get into.
Something happened this weekend for us too. We went to the first play that we've been to at the City Theater, and it was called The Dreams of Pimpolina, and it was a mime, a pantomime, and with music, and it was about this lady who was like a clown. And she makes out of everyday events, she has fun. Like someone tells her she has to mop the floor, and so she puts the mop on her head, and she makes it up like she has a different kind of hairstyle. And within a few moments, the kids were just part of this. And then on the other hand, there's two people on stage, and there's a man who's wearing a suit and he has a whistle. And every time Pimpolina has this crazy idea, he blows the whistle. He's called the don't do it, man. He shuts down everything. Well, you can imagine the kids, which side they chose. And they were for them, it was real. And Mandy and I, my wife, we were there, and we were back into our childhood just watching it, and it was great. And this was this was an event that, like you said, with the event you went to, that you were the only native English speaker. I believe we were the only native English speakers there, and how sad, because first of all, in a pantomime there were no words.
Yep.
and so there were opportunities. And there's all of that going on constantly in La Paz. And I think with a little bit of Spanish, confidence that comes with just a little bit of Spanish beyond the basics, that world opens up to you, and you can feel very comfortable going to those events.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I haven't been to any of the theater events. I don't feel like my Spanish is quite up to it. And I was talking with someone I had a phone call last night with someone who was interested in moving to Mexico, and one of the things we talked about was cultural things. And I said, well, if you move to a city like La Paz, which is it's pretty much a true Mexican city. It's kind of a Mexican tourist destination for people from Mexico City and Guadalajara, and there are some people from the U.S. and Canada here and some other areas, but it's still, we make up a small portion. And there are a number of people who do speak English, but by far the majority of the population does not. They are Spanish speakers, and we are in their country where Spanish is the language. But so the cultural events here pretty much happen in Spanish, versus if you're in an area like San Miguel de Allende, there I think are 3 English language theater companies in that town. So there are people who think La Paz is too gringofied, and they would rather be in an area that has less English speaking people, so they're really immersed. But there are multiple theaters here, there's multiple museums here, there's a lot of stuff here that's not really catering to English speakers because there's not a lot of us here. So in order to access those things, you need to have some Spanish. I actually went to a circus last year, I think, and I liked most the clown, actually, and I was able to kind of get some of it, and I feel like this year I probably would get a bunch more, but it was, like you said, a lot of it is acting and theater, and so it was funny, and you could kind of like the energy of the crowd. It's great stuff instead of sitting home watching Netflix to participate in that. So what other things are you having access to?
Brighton mentioned the museums. There's the art museum, which is right in the downtown area. And the other day I went there, and they get some guides who are graduates of the local university, and I try to speak Spanish with them, and they won't let me. They want to practice their English.
Yes.
And so we have to think about how were we at that age. We had learned the language, and so I gladly speak English with them. But I think the key is the curiosity, to have the curiosity and to show them that we really are interested in their culture, and the hearts just open up like no one's business. It is just wonderful. And every time, we have the art museum, we have the culture center, which is near the art museum. We have the cathedral. We have lots of places that have art galleries, and even in cafes. And then walk along the Malecon, you'll find something else. Just plug into the scene here, and it never ends. You're not going to be looking for places. And the more you speak Spanish, the more the opportunity to converse and learn their stories, because people are very friendly, very, very friendly.
Yeah, well, tell us where we are here. This is kind of like one of your offices around town. It's this gorgeous room with glass walls all around.
I have been coming to the History Museum. It has a longer name, but I've been coming here since we arrived because they have some great exhibits. And this is a room where I can come and study, and I can go into the exhibit and take some notes and ask questions. And we have books here for me to read. I know the director and I know the education director, and they are very accessible. Just getting permission to use this was just like a snap. It was so nice. In La Paz, the answer is usually yes. You do your homework, you're curious, you want to learn, the answer is usually yes. Another place that I love to go is the state archives. La Paz is the state capital for Baja California Sur, and the state archives are open Monday through Friday, and they're very helpful there. They've got books that you can't find anywhere else. And then there are people in the area where I read the books and take notes. There are people that I can turn to right away. And I had a question about a theater in El Triunfo. I saw a picture, and I said, what does this mean? It's kind of a different word. Does this literally mean the boy gunner? And they said, yes, it's from the War of Independence. It was about 1812. And but they didn't know a lot about it. And so I wrote down, someone wrote down the question, and they took me to the director, but the director was busy. And so the next time I came back, they handed me a piece of paper from the director that had answered my question.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just that sort of thing. And I take pictures of that because I want to tell people just how helpful people are. So if you have interests like that, say you're into artistic things, or like making like crafts and other things, there's stores here. And if you know a little bit of Spanish and you go into those stores, you're going to get help, and you may make a friend for life.
Yeah, that's true. Mexican people are so friendly, and they're so accepting too of other cultures, and showing that you're trying, even if you're not good at Spanish, opens a lot of doors. So you're a veteran of the U.S. military.
Yeah,
you've met some people down here too through that.
One day I was walking along the Malecon, and I had gone by this very nice building near where the fishermen are, and there were some people standing outside, and I saw something. I could read in the sign that it had something to do with the retired military. And so I walked up to them and I said, I'm retired from the United States Air Force, and I was just curious what you do here. And within a few minutes, we had a conversation, a nice conversation in Spanish. And they invited me to come and join them every Saturday. They play dominoes, but they also have presentations. And so I've gone there, and I have a whole new set of friends. And I'm learning about like the Mexican Navy. These guys most of them that are here, I think, were with the Navy, but others from the Army. What a cool environment. And I've watched them play dominoes. I haven't joined them in the dominoes game yet. I'm not ready to get crushed, but but that's coming.
Yes. Well, there are so many groups here, and I think that is, once again, the idea of how many additional things are available to you once you speak the language, and as you continue to get better and better. Because there are, as I started out this video, you can be here in Mexico. There are places where it's easier to exist without any Spanish. There are places where it's harder to exist without any Spanish. And La Paz is somewhere in between. And there are a number of gringos here who don't speak Spanish. There's a number. You're actually heading to a Spanish-speaking group or a Spanish lesson kind of intercambio group. There are lots of opportunities to learn Spanish here, and I think it is worth it. And you don't have to wait to get here to start learning. So I don't know if you have some tips for people for learning Spanish.
A lot of people are very, comfortable with apps on their phone to start with, and I would say that's a good start. But as soon as you can, after you've done a bit with the apps, find a teacher. It's incredibly inexpensive to find teachers online, and you can best get a native speaker. Someone from the country that you're going to. Mexican Spanish is the most spoken Spanish in the world. And so it's very easy to find a teacher online, and also join groups in your town. Some people have Spanish speaking schools. We did that in Portland, Oregon before we moved here. When we first got started back in 2016, we were part of a school that teaches Spanish. And later, because they knew us, my wife actually got a job there.
Oh, nice.
As their office person. But there are so many ways to learn Spanish. It is very, very easy. And when I compare it with German, it's not easier than German, but the resources are there. Every community in the United States has a native Spanish speaker practically. And so you can, on a daily basis, if you make a little bit of effort before you move here, you can have a conversation in Spanish. And it's just a magical thing to be able to step into that world, because once you get some ability, then, they say, what was it, Charlemagne said, and I don't remember the quote exactly, but when you possess more than one language, you have another soul. and it really is that way when you master a language. And I can add to what Brighton said, that you don't reach a point where you've completely done that. It's an ongoing process. To me, Spanish is for the rest of my life, just like German, just like English. I'm always trying to improve my English.
Yeah, that's true. There is, you like learning. There are people out there who are like the new English word of the day. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot to learn. And another thing to mention here, because a lot of folks who are moving to Mexico are getting older, learning a language is really good brain activity and keeping yourself sharp, because it's not easy. I mean, as we're getting older, this is not easy to learn another language, but it's better than doing crossword puzzles or whatnot, I think, in terms of what the doors that you open by learning that language. You could be a great crossword puzzle person or a great Wordle person, but all you do with Wordle is post it to your Facebook profile. Spanish is going to open some doors. And then each of those doors, it kind of just ramps up as you go. The more you know, the more you're able to piece more things together. And I think it builds all that neural network in your brain.
Yeah, we have to also not be too hard on ourselves with Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
If you know the word but you can't get the verb tense right, don't sweat it. They get it, okay? They'll figure out what you're trying to say. It's more important to just let the words come out of your mouth, and just gradually you'll notice patterns and you'll get more things right. Just that process alone is a beautiful process, and it's a lot of fun, and it makes for a lot of laughs.
Yeah, actually, I like that. I hadn't thought about that. It's just using the infinitive of a word. Like it's like hablar, to talk. It's, if you're talking with someone and you try to conjugate it, you conjugate it wrong, you probably confuse them more. But if you just say hablar, they know that you're talking about someone is talking, they're talking in the past, they're talking in the future. But if you try to conjugate it, you say you instead of me, it can be confusing. So I think just overly simplifying your Spanish sometimes helps.
Yeah, that's right. And be okay with simple sentences. And yeah, just hand it to them on a platter. This is what I got.
Yep.
And they'll fix it for you.
Yeah, and well, that's the other thing. You can use Google Translate. Like I said, when I was at the quinceañera, I was using Google Translate as I went. I was like, oh, he just said something, but also recognize the limitations of Google Translate is that it gave me a translation that was correct 90% of the time, but wasn't correct in the context that we were talking about. So that's that's somewhat of a challenge.
Yeah, the language to me is a beautiful thing. And we're talking about that, and I'm thinking with these life events and the culture that's tied to Spanish here in Mexico. It's a window to another world. It's a window to with insights that can really be important to us. Like I was just thinking today, I was writing about the kitchen. The kitchen here is so important. People make things by hand, and they make things more by hand because their lives are slower. They're not always in a hurry. And why are they not in a hurry? And these are all things for us to explore and think about, I think, coming from our culture that is way overhyped, and we're just always in a rush. Yeah. And we can settle down and kind of rediscover something that can really change our lives.
Well, there we go. Let's wrap this up on that note. Spanish language, let it change your life. Let it get you that access to an additional soul, if that's what you're looking for. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to do that like, subscribe thing. I've got a couple videos up here. I'm just going to pop one up from Q RuPaul, just because he has a Spanish language that a lot of people like. I like his stuff. And some other interviews with expats all living down in Mexico, because if they can do it, you can do it too. Hasta luego.